It was supposed to be a relaxing evening, a glass of wine, warm bubbles and soft laughter under the night sky. But what happened next left everyone frozen in fear. My mum's friend, a woman full of life, vanished before our eyes in the hot tub. What started as a simple night of relaxation turned into a nightmare we still can't explain. Stay with me till the end, because this story will send chills down your spine. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, the kind that makes you forget all your worries. The backyard was glowing with soft string lights, the scent of lavender candles mixed with the crisp night air, and the sound of music played gently from a small speaker. Everything felt perfect. My mum had invited a few friends over, just a small gathering to unwind after a long week. Lillian, her closest friend, arrived first, as she always did. She was full of life, the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. Her laughter was infectious, and tonight she was in high spirits. The hot tub had been heating up for an hour, steam rising into the cool night. My mum and her friends poured themselves glasses of wine, their chatter blending with the bubbling water. Lillian was the first to dip her foot in. "Oh, this is perfect," she sighed, stepping in completely. She leaned her head back, letting the warmth envelop her. "Come on, what are you all waiting for?" My mum chuckled, following her lead along with the other guests. The water rippled as they settled in, shoulders relaxing, conversations flowing. They talked about everything, work, family, the latest gossip. It was one of those nights where time just slips away. I wasn't part of their little gathering, just an observer from inside the house. The window was slightly open, allowing me to hear their laughter, the occasional clinking of glasses and the bubbling of the water. From where I stood, it seemed like any other night, normal, calm. But that feeling didn't last long. 15 minutes passed and something changed. At first it was subtle. My mum told me later that the air around them felt heavier, almost like it was pressing down on their shoulders. The warmth of the hot tub, once soothing, now felt suffocating. Lillian, who had been the loudest and most talkative, suddenly fell silent. She sat up straight, eyes staring ahead, her hands gripping the sides of the tub. My mum noticed immediately. "Lillian?" she asked. "You okay?" Lillian didn't respond. Her breathing had changed, shallow, uneven. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Something's touching my foot." A nervous chuckle rippled through the group. "Probably just the bubbles," one of them joked. But Lillian shook her head, her eyes dark with fear. "No, it's different. It's holding me." Silence fell over the group. My mum leaned forward, the laughter from earlier completely gone. "Lillian, lift your foot. See if—" Before she could finish, Lillian gasped, a short, sharp breath that cut through the air like a knife. She lurched forward, her hands flailing as if she was trying to grab onto something. Water splashed wildly around her, and then, just like that, she was gone. No splash, no struggle, no sign of where she had gone. 1 second she was there, the next she wasn't. The hot tub, still bubbling, was empty. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke. The water, disturbed by the sudden movement, rippled in slow, widening circles. Then my mum whispered, almost like she was afraid to break the silence, "Lillian!" But there was no answer. The air grew colder, the night suddenly feeling much darker than before. And that's when the panic set in. For a few heart-stopping moments, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint bubbling of the hot tub, as if nothing had happened, as if Lillian hadn't just vanished before their eyes. My mum's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. People don't just disappear. That's impossible. But Lillian was gone. One of the guests, a woman named Celeste, was the first to react. She shot up, water sloshing over the edge. "Lillian!" Her voice cracked with panic. She turned her head frantically, scanning the yard, expecting to see Lillian standing nearby, laughing at some elaborate prank. But there was nothing. No movement. No sign of her at all. "This isn't funny!" Another friend, Daniel, stood up, looking around. His voice wavered despite trying to sound firm. "Where is she?" My mum reached into the water, hands searching blindly. Her fingers swept along the smooth bottom of the tub. Nothing. Just warm water and the gentle hum of the jets. "She has to be here," Celeste insisted, dropping to her knees beside the tub and plunging her hands in, feeling around in desperation. She couldn't have just disappeared. But the truth sat there, heavy and undeniable. Lillian was nowhere to be found. A shiver ran down my mum's spine, despite the heat of the water. The weight in the air pressed down harder, thick and suffocating. Something felt wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. "Turn off the jets," my mum muttered, barely recognizing her own voice. Daniel fumbled with the controls, his hands shaking as he twisted the dial. The bubbling stopped instantly, leaving the surface of the water eerily still. The silence was deafening. And that's when they noticed it. The water should have settled, but it didn't. Instead, tiny ripples moved outward, as if something or someone was still shifting beneath the surface. Celeste took a shaky step back. "Oh my God," she whispered. My mum's heart pounded against her ribs. Every instinct told her to run, to get out of that water immediately, but she couldn't leave, not without Lillian. Then, out of nowhere, a deep, strangled gasp echoed through the yard. Everyone turned sharply toward the sound. It came from behind them, from the other side of the yard. My mum spun around, her blood running cold. "Lillian!" There, at the far end of the backyard, just beyond the glow of the patio lights, stood a dark, soaking wet figure, dripping, shivering, eyes wide with something beyond fear. Lillian. But she wasn't standing the way a person should. She was hunched forward, her arms limp at her sides, her head tilted slightly as though she didn't quite recognize where she was. A thick silence filled the air, no one daring to move, no one daring to breathe. Then, in a slow, trembling voice, Lillian whispered, "It was holding me." A chill ran through my mum's entire body. Lillian took a shaky step forward, and in the dim light, they could finally see her face. Her skin was pale, her lips nearly blue, her eyes unfocused, distant, like she had seen something none of them could. What do you mean?" my mum asked, her voice barely audible. Lillian swallowed hard, her breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. "It pulled me down," she whispered. "I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was so dark, so cold." She broke off, shaking her head violently as if trying to erase the memory from her mind. Celeste stepped forward hesitantly. "Lillian, where did you go? How did you—" "I don't know." Lillian's voice was raw, strained. "One second I was in the water, the next I wasn't." She lifted her arms slightly as if finally noticing the state of her own body. Her clothes were drenched, sticking to her skin. But something was wrong. There were no wet footprints leading from the hot tub to where she stood. No splashes, no signs of struggle. Nothing. It was as if she had simply appeared there. Daniel took an uneasy step backward, his face pale. That's impossible." Lillian's head snapped toward him so quickly that he flinched. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Then, without warning, her entire body lurched forward. She collapsed. My mum rushed toward her, catching her just before she hit the ground. Lillian's body was freezing, far colder than it should have been, given that she had just been in hot water. Her lips trembled as she clung to my mum's arm. "Don't go back in," she whispered. "Don't go back." Then her eyes rolled back and she went completely limp. The night was no longer just unsettling, it had become a nightmare. The world felt frozen. My mum knelt on the damp grass, cradling Lillian's limp body, her mind refusing to accept what had just happened. 1 second, Lillian was in the hot tub, laughing, relaxed. The next, she was gone, vanished without a trace, only to reappear across the yard, soaked and shaking, her body colder than ice. And now she was unconscious. Celeste was the first to break the silence. "We need to get her inside." Her voice was sharp with urgency, but there was an edge of fear underneath. My mum nodded quickly, snapping out of her trance. She and Daniel lifted Lillian carefully, her body slack between them. She felt unnaturally heavy for someone so small, as if something unseen was still holding onto her. They carried her into the house, the warmth of the living room washing over them. My mum grabbed a blanket and wrapped it tightly around Lillian's trembling frame. Celeste knelt beside her, gently patting her cheek. "Lillian, can you hear me?" Lillian's eyelids fluttered. Her breathing was shallow, her lips slightly parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the strength. Daniel grabbed his phone. "I'm calling 911. But the moment he unlocked his screen, Lillian's eyes snapped open. "No!" she gasped, her hand shooting out to grab his wrist. Daniel flinched, his phone nearly slipping from his grip. "Lillian, you need help." She shook her head violently, her eyes wild. "They won't believe us," she choked out. "They won't understand." My mom crouched beside her. "Lillian, please, tell us what happened. Where did you go?" Lillian swallowed hard, her throat moving as if she was forcing down something bitter. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know." The weight of those 3 words pressed down on everyone in the room. "You don't know?" Celeste echoed, confusion laced with fear. Lillian shook her head. "It was dark, empty, but I wasn't alone." A shiver ran down my mum's spine. "Who was with you?" Lillian's eyes darted toward the window, toward the backyard. She didn't answer, but the way her face twisted with fear was enough. Something had taken her. Something had let her go. But what if it wasn't finished? The hot tub. Daniel stood abruptly, running a hand through his damp hair. "Okay, we need to figure this out. We all saw it happen. She was gone. But she couldn't have just teleported across the yard." He exhaled sharply. "There has to be an explanation." "Like what?" Celeste shot back. "She blacked out and swam under the deck." Daniel didn't have an answer. None of them did. That's when my mum noticed something strange. The house was warm. They had been inside for nearly 15 minutes now, but the smell of chlorine still clung to Lillian's skin. And the water, it wasn't drying. Her clothes were still dripping, as if she had just climbed out of the hot tub, as if time hadn't moved for her. My mum swallowed the lump in her throat. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "Something's really wrong." Then, from outside, the hot tub turned back on by itself. Everyone froze. The sound of bubbling water filled the yard once more, soft at first, then growing louder, angrier. A chill settled over the room. "Did someone?" Celeste trailed off, already knowing the answer. No one had touched the controls. No one had gone back outside. The hot tub had turned itself on. Lillian suddenly gripped my mum's arm, her fingers digging into her skin. Her breathing had turned ragged, her body trembling harder than before. "It wants me back," she whispered. A sharp knock rattled the patio door. Everyone spun toward the sound. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The hairs on the back of my mum's neck stood up. Lillian whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut. "Don't open it," she begged. "Please." Daniel, despite every instinct screaming at him to stay away, took a cautious step toward the door. He peered outside. The backyard was empty. But the hot tub? The water had turned black. a deep, swirling void where steam should have been rising. Daniel staggered back. What the hell? Then, as if sensing their fear, the knocking came again. Harder, louder, bang, bang, bang. "Lillian," my mum whispered, her hands shaking. "What is out there?" Lillian's lips trembled. "I don't know," she whispered, but the terror in her eyes told them one thing: it wasn't human. The air inside the house felt heavy, thick with something unseen. The knocking had stopped, but the silence it left behind was even worse. It wasn't normal. It wasn't peaceful. It felt watched. Lillian sat curled up in the corner of the couch, still shivering beneath the thick blanket. No matter how much warmth surrounded her, her skin remained ice cold. Her breathing was slow and uneven, like she was afraid to take full breaths, as if something would hear her. My mum's heart pounded in her chest. Every fibre of her being told her to grab the keys, get everyone into the car, and drive as far away from this place as possible. But somehow she knew it wouldn't let them leave. Daniel was still near the patio door, his face pale, his hands clenched into tight fists. He had seen it too. The water in the hot tub had turned pitch black, swirling in slow, hypnotic movements, as if something deep beneath the surface was waiting. Celeste broke the silence first. "We need to do something." Her voice was quiet but firm. Daniel turned to her, shaking his head. "Like what?" Celeste hesitated, then swallowed hard. "We can't just sit here." She motioned toward Lillian. "She's not okay. We don't even know what happened to her. What if this isn't over?" At those words, Lillian let out a sharp breath. Her hands clutched at the blanket, her fingers digging into the fabric. "It's not over," she whispered. My mum's stomach twisted. "Lillian," she said gently, kneeling beside her, "tell us everything, please. We need to understand." Lillian blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused, like she was still trapped in that dark place. I was in the water," she started, her voice hoarse. "And then I wasn't." A pause. "It pulled me under, not fast, not sudden. It was slow, like it wanted me to know what was happening, like it wanted me to feel every second of it." A cold chill ran through the room. Lillian swallowed hard, her lips trembling. "At first I thought I was drowning, but I could breathe." She shook her head, pressing a hand to her chest. "I was somewhere else. It was dark, but I wasn't alone." My mum's breath caught in her throat. "Who was with you?" Lillian's eyes flickered toward the patio door, her body tensing. Celeste followed her gaze, whispering, "Is it still out there?" Lillian gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. A pit of dread settled deep in my mom's stomach. Daniel exhaled shakily. "We should drain the hot tub." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment. Then Lillian sat up so fast that the blanket slid off her shoulders. "No." Her voice was sharp, desperate. "You can't," Daniel frowned. "Why not? If there's something in there, we should get rid of it." "You don't understand," Lillian snapped. "It let me go for a reason. If we drain it, we're breaking something, a connection, a deal. I don't know." She rubbed her arms, her entire body trembling. "But I feel it. If we try to get rid of it, it won't just stay in the water," Celeste whispered. "You think it will come inside?" Lillian didn't answer, but the fear in her eyes was enough. Silence hung thick in the room. Then a sound, a faint gurgling noise. It was coming from the patio door. My mum turned her head slowly, her blood running ice cold. The sound grew louder, bubbles, like something breathing underwater. Daniel inched toward the door again, hesitant but unable to stop himself. He peered outside. His breath caught in his throat. The hot tub. It wasn't just bubbling anymore. The water was churning, spinning violently in circles, as if something beneath the surface was trying to rise. Then, through the thick, inky blackness, he saw it. A hand, reaching. Pale, bony fingers stretched upward, pressing against the surface of the water like a thin sheet of glass. A slow, deliberate movement. Then another hand. Then a face. It wasn't Lillian's. It wasn't anyone's. It had hollow eyes, bottomless pits of darkness. A twisted, unnatural grin stretched across its face. It was looking right at him. Daniel stumbled back so fast he nearly fell. "Lock the door!" he shouted. My mum lunged forward, sliding the lock into place, but the second she did, the lights went out. Pitch-black darkness swallowed the house. Lillian let out a strangled sob. "It's here," she whispered. A heavy silence filled the air. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, a single wet footprint appeared on the floor, and another, closer, closer. Something had gotten inside. The darkness swallowed the room whole. The only sound was the shallow, terrified breathing of the people inside. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. Then, tap. A wet, slapping sound echoed against the wooden floor. A footprint, tap, another, closer this time. My mum clutched Lillian's trembling hand. Celeste pressed a fist to her mouth, stifling a whimper. Daniel reached blindly for his phone, but the screen refused to turn on. The air had changed. It was damp, heavy. A thick scent of chlorine and something rotten filled the room. Something was here. Then, in the suffocating silence, Lillian whispered the words none of them wanted to hear. "It followed me." The footprints stopped. A breath, not theirs, rasped through the darkness. It was slow, shaky, wet, like lungs filled with water. Then a whisper, low, broken, right next to my mum's ear. "Come back!" A scream tore through the air as the room exploded into chaos. Lillian jolted like she'd been shocked, her body twisting violently as if something had grabbed her. Her eyes rolled back, and she let out a gurgling sound, her hands clawing at her throat. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing her shoulders. "Lillian! Lillian! Stay with us!" But she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze, wide, unblinking, was fixed on something behind him. Celeste yanked open the nearest drawer, fumbling for something, anything to use as a weapon. Her hands wrapped around a pair of scissors, her grip so tight her knuckles turned white. My mum didn't think, she acted. She grabbed the salt shaker from the counter and hurled it across the floor, scattering white crystals in every direction. For a split second the air seemed to shudder, and then a sharp, ear-splitting screech. It wasn't human. The house shook, cabinets rattled, the windows trembled, and in the briefest flicker of moonlight, my mum saw it. A twisted, waterlogged figure, crouched in the corner of the room. Its limbs were long, unnaturally bent. Its skin was slick, like something that had spent far too long underwater, and its mouth, a gaping, jagged hole, stretched across its face. It saw them, it wanted Lillian, and it was angry. Then the lights flickered back on. Just like that, the air lightened. The suffocating dampness faded. The stench of chlorine thinned. And the thing? Gone. But the footprints, they remained. A trail of wet, inky black prints led back to the patio door, and outside, the hot tub was still, the water clear. Steam rose into the night air as if nothing had ever happened. No sign of the thing, no sign of the swirling blackness. Just warm, inviting water. Lillian collapsed into my mum's arms, her body shaking with silent sobs. Daniel ran a trembling hand down his face. What the hell just happened? No one had an answer. But one thing was certain, they could never use that hot tub again. Celeste was the first to speak. "We drain it, right now, I don't care what Lillian said. That thing is not staying here." Lillian swallowed, her voice hoarse. "I think it's already gone." My mum turned toward her. "How do you know?" Lillian exhaled shakily, because it got what it wanted. A thick silence fell over the room, and then the patio light flickered, for just a second, just long enough for them to see it, a single, soaking wet handprint on the glass, fingers pressed against the window. Then, in the blink of an eye, it faded. Gone. Just like that, and deep beneath the water, unseen, something laughed. Some doors should never be opened, and some water is better left undisturbed. Watch till the end to hear more chilling stories. If you think this was chilling, wait until you hear what happened next. Stay tuned.